You can imagine the impact. If I showed you pictures of the room I was staying in, you would see for yourself that there's no way I would have come out of this alive.
If you kill or you seriously injure a police officer or any blue light worker, there should be a minimum term.
It's not enough just having, sort of black people on your Instagram feed or in a magazine. We've accomplished that. But now, behind the scenes, that's when change really happens.
These are the species that can help us face some of the most severe environmental crises that we face.
Whoa! This was the moment an explosion ripped through the city's port and devastated neighbourhoods for miles around. The shockwave was felt all over the city. A place so scarred from decades of conflict had never seen anything quite like this before.
Linda Tamin is a journalist and radio presenter in Beirut. Tell us what happened to you when this explosion occurred.
I was exiting work, the radio station, yesterday, and just the minute I got into my Uber, the bomb went off. So had I still been in the office, in the studio, all the glass would have just poured in on top of my head. So you can imagine the impact. If I showed you pictures of the room I was staying in, you would see for yourself that there's no way I would have come out of this alive. And then my first reaction was, what do? We had hundreds of wounded people coming towards us and trying to get into the car and begging every single car passing by to drive them to hospitals. So eventually I gave my cab to people in need, and I ended up walking, and I've been on air ever since. I tell you, it's been a whirlwind for me. This was really the last thing, not just the hospital needed, but also the state itself. We were suffering of COVID-19 just like the rest of the world. On top of that, we had a complete economic collapse. And this was really the last thing that Lebanon needed. And just when we thought we had hit rock bottom, this happened. The worst part is that you have people, missing their loved ones. They don't even know where they are. Some of them are buried under the rubble. So we have at least 100 people missing so far. But on top of that, we have people who are wounded and injured, and they've been taken to hospitals, and their families don't even know where they are or how to locate them. So it's just a plain catastrophe, to say the least.
People there must be shocked, yes, but furious too.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Some people, started taking to the streets. I mean, this was just, like I said, the cherry on top of the cake. We've already had so many disappointments coming from our government. And not just disappointments, but we were literally let down as a people. And I think we've reached an unprecedented level of anger against our government. And it's a shame, really. I mean, I just can't even, I don't have the words to tell you how angry we all are.
And is it, along with the anger, a sense of hopelessness too, for all the reasons that you've just outlined?
Absolutely. The problem is, and I've been saying this for a while, and I'm usually a very optimistic person, for the first time, I just don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. I just don't see it. And I hate sounding so pessimistic. I don't know what the solution is. And the worst is, every time I feel that's it, okay, we can only go up from here. We've reached rock bottom already. It can only improve. Something else comes up. So I pray to God that, eventually the wheel turns and Lebanon, experiences a better fate.
The mother of PC Andrew Harper, who died after being dragged along the road by a getaway car, is calling for a new law which would see anyone convicted of killing a serving police officer sent to jail for a minimum of 20 years. She's been talking to Lisa Dowd.
I really believe that we need a clear-cut system for how things are going to be in the future. If you kill or you seriously injure a police officer or any blue light worker, there should be a minimum term. We didn't get what we thought was right for Andrew, but we've had to go through this trial thinking we'd be in a different position now. We've called this campaign Andrew's Law. We want to give a legacy to his name. His legacy isn't the sentence that was received. I miss his comical presence, really. Just knowing that he's there and you're not going to see him is just so difficult. pin down to one thing. He just lit up the room. He was just always funny and caring.
I mean, to anyone looking, they might think, oh, you're dealing with it remarkably well, but what's the real picture for you?
The real picture is you wake up in the morning, people assume that you've got, you wake up and suddenly it hits you like a brick. It's not like that. It's 24/7 in my mind. It's a percentage of my brain 24/7, so I don't sleep and forget and have that feeling. I wake up knowing exactly that he's not here.
Debbie, could you take me back to the moment that you were told about what had happened to Andrew?
Waking up to a knock on the door at 4:45 in the morning. And two officers were stood at the door, and they kind of said, "Can we come in?" And they were already in, really. And they just told me straight out. They didn't soft coat it, which is the right way to do it, I think. I just kept telling them to not tell me. Don't tell me that, because you just don't want to hear it, and you try your hardest not to take it in and not to believe it, and then they're standing there, then you can't close your eyes and open them and they're gone, they're still there.
Can you tell me why you've chosen the blue lined feather and the particular number to be the kind of emblems for your campaign?
Yeah, the number was his shoulder number. And initially we were going to use a blue line, which has been used many times before, but I went out to give some bird food out to the robins the other day, and then I found this amazing feather, which was just sat there waiting for me, and it's a big black feather with a big bright blue stripe going down the side, and it just felt like a gift. This is the best way to honour him at the moment, and make that his legacy. Something positive that reflects the injustice of what he's sadly been put through.
Back in April, the former British tennis player Dan Long was hospitalised for 6 days with COVID-19. He's since donated his plasma to the NHS, which is trying to establish if it can treat patients struggling to develop an immune response. Just tell us a little bit more about your time in hospital. 6 days of it, in fact.
Yeah, that as it turns out, is a relatively short time in hospital. I probably should have been more agreeable to being admitted earlier. But once I got in there, I was immediately put on oxygen, and thankfully I didn't deteriorate any further. One of my biggest concerns when I was admitted to hospital was whether I would need treatment in an ICU bed. But I got better, and the consultants were happy to discharge me after just 6 days, when my oxygen levels returned to something like normal.
How concerned were you when you went into hospital? It's never nice when one is forced into those environments in the first place, but there must have been a degree of concern.
Yeah, there was. I mean, my body was pretty much shutting down, and I think you naturally go into a survival mode. And you have to admit, there weren't actually that many lucid moments where I had time to think about the position that I was in. But I'd been following the news. I knew about the statistics around being admitted to ICU, and yeah, essentially, I figured maybe it would be a 50-50 chance if I found myself in that situation. So yes, it was pretty scary. But what became apparent to me, Neil, is just how little those caring for me had to turn to in ways to treat me and others suffering from COVID-19. They do an incredible job in the most difficult circumstances, but the reason why I am so keen to get the message out there about convalescent plasma is because it could become the first treatment that directly attacks the virus itself. Because, and I don't know if people know this widely enough, that when you're in hospital, all the doctors and nurses can do is manage your symptoms. And convalescent plasma, if the trials become successful, could become a treatment that directly fights the virus, and that's why this is so important.
So what should people do if they want to follow suit, if they want to heed your advice and help out?
It's donate. It's a very simple message here. Plasma, especially from people who have recovered from COVID-19, may help save someone's life. And this is about mobilising an army. There have been, I think, to date, over 130,000 hospital admissions, and those that have survived I see as an army. And the only way we can mobilise that army and give the NHS a viable weapon to fight this disease is by donating our plasma.
Edward Enninful says he won't shy away from controversy and will use his platform to address injustices. After 3 years at the helm, the biggest challenge facing the British editor of Vogue isn't who to put on the front cover, but how to reflect a pandemic and a global movement.
Tell us about the September issue, the concept, the idea behind it, and what has materialised.
So the September issue is a very special one. The cover was shot by a photographer called Misan Harriman. He's a black photographer, and it was an all-black team. We have Marcus, the footballer from Manchester. He literally used his platform to get all the young kids fed. Then we have Adjoa Aboa. They're on the main cover. And Adjoa's used her platform to talk about mental health. We went from COVID to talking about environmental issues to the biggest moment in civil rights history. I mean, the whole world of the marches, and I felt like these incredible people who were sort of giving their time and their lives to make sure that there was social justice in the world, to make sure that there was education and community care. These were the people who were the new heroes.
You actually went out on a march, didn't you?
It was so peaceful. People of all colours and all races were there. And what really struck me about that day, about how, that George Floyd's death hasn't been in vain, it brought everyone together.
You've tweeted about, being at a fashion show and not being sat on the front row with your peers. I mean, that was quite brave of you.
When you walk into a show and all fashion directors are in the front row and you're in the second row, straight away that's you, profiling me. Even a few weeks ago, the same thing sort of happened.
The incident that you're referring to in the office, when you were racially profiled by a security guard in your own office, how did you feel when that happened?
It wasn't an isolated incident. Of course, it takes you back to all those moments in your life when that has happened. And I think people think that when you're successful, that things like that don't happen. For me, the beauty of that incident is it just makes me aware never to think I'm too successful.
Are you hopeful now that there will be other Edward Enninfuls coming behind you, that people will feel that the doors have been opened?
Oh, I will make sure there is. For me, it's been so important just not being the only one, but always bringing people up with me. And I think it's so important. The fashion industry needs to, employ more people behind the scenes, recruitment. I think it's not enough just having black people on your Instagram feed or in a magazine. We've accomplished that. But now, behind the scenes, that's when change really happens.
Pablo Escobar, it's a name we've rather forgotten now, isn't it? A name known to many as the world's most notorious, infamous drug lord. In a new book, however, his firstborn son tells his own story. Roberto Sandoya Escobar was rescued as a baby following a shootout in which his mother died. Adopted by an MI6 agent, he never knew his true identity until he was 24.
What we're actually talking about here is a situation where later on my adopted father, the MI6 agent, has to tell me who I am, and that is obviously a dreadful shock to me. And I asked him what these vague nightmare memories were that I was experiencing as a baby, and described them to him, and then he obviously came clean with what had happened to me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in the mid-60s, he wasn't the sort of colossus of the crime world that he became. I mean, this was somebody who, yeah.
Yeah, so effectively, Colombia was full of gangs, similar to gangs we have today in inner cities, really. And a young Pablo Escobar was a member of one of these gangs, and unfortunately for them, they decided to take it upon themselves to rob one of the armored cars of the De La Rue operation in Colombia, which led to a special forces raid on the hideout of the gang, where they got the money back. Unfortunately, there was a young lady in the back room and she'd copped a bullet, and she was only 14, and there was a baby in the cot. And this is all the stuff that Dad told me later. And he was with her when she died, and he promised to look after her baby boy, and the boy was Roberto Sendoya Escobar.
The MI6 agent takes you under his wing. You go to an English school for a while. You get set on this completely different trajectory. Pablo Escobar tried to make contact with you, is that correct?
Contact was made by my adopted father, and all the complicated business arrangements that are discussed in the book. I remember it as clear as day, and I used to have to sit next to him, and, he would talk to me and stuff like that. I remember his smell of cologne and hashish and, all that sort of stuff. But, we did used to have to go and see him, or have to. I was told to go and see him, and I was flanked by my bodyguards. I felt okay, but I was confused, and, I didn't know what was going on. I was a very young child, and these were just sort of things that I had to do because the grown-ups told me to do it.
And do you remember, Roberto, when you heard that he'd been killed in this shootout in, what was it, 1993?
Effectively, 93 was a terrible year, and at the end of the year, I'm watching the news in sunny Walton-on-Thames in Surrey, and I see that the guy that my dad had been telling me about has been shot in the head, and so yes, very frightening, and I spiraled after that into a very bad period of depression, and this is why it took me over 20 years to write this book.
I tell you what, Roberto, people write books with about 1% of the interest value of your life story that you tell us, or are going to be telling us in this book. Absolutely incredible. And just one final thought. I know you as an artist, you're known as Philip Whitcomb. Which name do you prefer to go by? Yeah. One that tells the story of your life, or that?
Yes, I've got. It's basically I've got two lives and two names. It's not a problem. I've been called a lot worse than Philip Whitcomb in my time.
England's first wild beavers in 400 years have been given the permanent right to stay in their home in Devon. It means the future is secure for the first ever reintroduction of an extinct native mammal to England. Conservationists, well, they've been welcoming the government's decision. They say there are many benefits to having beavers in rivers. And what might those benefits be? Joining us from Otterton is Steve Hussey from the Devon Wildlife Trust. Tell us just a little bit about the project. How has it gone for you guys?
Oh, it's been an outstanding success. I mean, Devon Wildlife Trust and its partners have worked hard over the last 5 years to see the first reintroduction of a British mammal species into an English landscape, so that's wonderful news. But it's good news, I think, there's wider news that's better than that even, and that is that these are species that can help us face some of the most severe environmental crises that we face in the 21st century. So they can have an impact, a positive impact on things like flooding and drought, and also on water quality. So these beavers come with as a package that helps wildlife and helps people.
So what is the next step? Are we going to be seeing beavers being reintroduced in parts of the country other than Devon now?
Well, the government has said that it's now going to take some time to consult the wider public on what the future of beavers is elsewhere. What today's decision means is that the beaver population, which has been here for the last 5 years, has the right to remain permanently. And it could spread to neighbouring rivers, but it's going to take a long time before these beavers reach rivers on the outskirts of London and elsewhere in England. So it will need a reintroduction programme, a wider one. That's what we would hope that the government decides to do in the future. But as I said, they're going to consult on that because beavers do come with challenges. They're not just a species that simply goes unnoticed. They have an impact on the landscapes which they populate.
So does that mean that there has to be a degree of management of any new beaver population?
That's been the key to the success of this project. We've worked with landowners, with farmers who have beavers on their land. And beavers build dams, that's what they're known for. And those dams can create some local challenges. They can create localised flooding. But what those dams also do is hold the water back in our landscapes, which means that communities downstream, which might be flood prone, see some relief from that threat. And also, beavers' dams trap sediment, the pollution that runs off our landscape, off our fields, and that helps us in terms of water quality as well. But the people who pay for those challenges, the farmers who beavers set up home on their land, they're the ones that we have to support. We have to support them with practical help, and it may be that we also pay them, give them a subsidy to have beavers on their land.
I'm really sorry, Steve. I've got my director giggling away in my ear as she looks at pictures of what I have to admit are incredibly cute little animals. But what happened to our native beaver population in the first place?
Well, we don't know how the beavers got here. They've probably been here for more than 12, 13, 14 years. But in 2013, we found out that they were breeding here, and then in 2014 the government announced they were going to remove the beaver population. That's when we stepped in with local people to set up a trial to see what impact they would have on the local landscape, on local wildlife and local people. And the culmination of that is today's decision by DEFRA that they can stay. So it's very positive news.